Do you guys know that I have chickens and ducks and rabbits?
Ooh, rabbit. I didn't know rabbit. I want to taste.
Funny story. Well, not funny story, but the chickens killed one of my ducks, and I was upset. And then it mauled the other one and injured it. And I took him or her, I don't know what sex they are yet, but I took him to the vet, and they charged me like $500. Like checked up on it, and they gave me like oral pain medication and antibiotics, and then like an ointment for the like bloodied part of its back that was like pecked at. I probably shouldn't have. I didn't have to bring it to the vet. I just felt, I don't know. I just felt so bad for it.
Just call me next time. I could have given you something way easier and cheaper.
Oh, cool. Well, anyway, since the chickens mauled it almost to death and killed its sibling, I took it out of the coop and put it in my brother's dog kennel. And then today, I went home at like 3:30 just to check up on the rabbits, feed them, make sure the chickens have adequate stuff, and then I gave my duck a little bit of food. And then while the doors open, it just flew out of there and went running. And I chased that thing for like 35 minutes, called my brother in, and then he brought his dog out, and we narrowed it down to this brush pile. It was like a bunch of sticks and logs and stuff. This giant pile. It like went in there and it was like all hiding in that, and I couldn't reach it. And so my brother, me, and the dog had like triangulated the duck into the spot. We were trying to like push it out of there. So the brush pile's like this high, okay? And it's probably like as big as like this white chair to that where Jackson is, okay? Big pile. And I run in there and I'm like trudging through. I'm like bounding through this like brush pile, scratching my legs apart, and then trying to like push the duck. And here's the strategy that finally won. I like jumped and kind of like rustled the branches and forced it out into the open. And it went halfway up the yard into my neighbor's yard. And then I kind of very stealthily crouched down and snuck up on it, grabbed my sweatshirt, went to the right side a little bit to block him from going back into the pile. And he was over there. I told my brother to hold his dog to the side, like kind of way over there, like 20 feet. And then right when I had the duck where I wanted it, I told my brother to let the dog go. The dog whoosh, went right behind the duck, brought it towards me, and then at the right moment it was in range, I threw my sweatshirt on it, and it was like, rah, whoosh. I didn't crush it. I just jumped on it, grabbed him, and then finally threw him back in the kennel, and he was fine. So that was the highlight of my day today.
Why didn't you just eat it?
Why didn't I eat the duck? Because I like the duck, and I want him or her, and hopefully it's a her, because then I'll get duck eggs. Anyway, that's my fun story for today. Let's get to the message. All right, so we have been going through a series. Now I'm distracted. We've been going through a series through the Old Testament. We started with Genesis, the creation account, went to the fall of mankind and the flood story, and then Danny brought us Joe brought us the patriarchs last week. And so today, after the patriarchs, the last patriarch actually had a son called Joseph, and this is who we're going to be talking about today. So before we jump in, the small group questions, you guys can jot these down and try to think these through as we go along. How long did Joseph wait for God's promise? He had a dream, a promise of something to happen. How long did he wait for that? Why was Joseph listed in Hebrews 11? We'll get to that towards the end. Why is he listed in Hebrews 11 as a hero of the faith, this hall of faith that we have, these great men and women who have displayed faith in God? Why is he listed there? And what's your favorite part of the story of Joseph? And from there, your small groups, you can talk about whatever you want. So I'm going to have to cut through a lot of stuff very briefly because it is like a fourth of the whole book of Genesis, and we don't have time to read all that today. So bear with me. Joseph takes place in Genesis 37 through 50. It's 1/4 of the book, minus one chapter. It cuts out at 38 for a weird reason. Joseph was the firstborn of his mother Rachel, which was his father's favorite wife. She had pleasant eyes, while her sister had weak eyes. We don't know what that means exactly, but maybe she was lacking a little bit of the physical appearance. Who knows? Rachel was his father's favorite wife, and Joseph was 11 out of 12 of his other half-brothers. Joseph waited 23 years for God's promise to take place. Joseph was given a double portion of his father's blessing later in his father's on his deathbed, and he's giving blessings and some curses to his sons. And when he gets to Joseph, he gives him a double portion, which is funny because the firstborn of the household gets a double portion of the father's blessing. But he gives it to Joseph, even though Joseph was 11th. But he was the firstborn of his son, Rachel. So Joseph had a pretty dysfunctional family. Abraham had a son through his wife's servant, and he named him Ishmael. And they did that because they got impatient waiting for God's promise for Isaac. Joe talked about that last week. They got impatient. They had a son through the servant girl. And then God finally gives Abraham this son, the promised son, Isaac. But then what happens next is Ishmael, the son through the servant girl, starts throwing some shade at Isaac, if you guys know that term. He's making fun of him. And then Sarah gets upset and makes Abraham throw him out. Throw Ishmael along with his mother out of the house. Get rid of them, send them on their way. And then later, Isaac, when he's older, he is tricked by his second-born son, Jacob. They were twins, Esau and Jacob. The second-born Jacob to give Esau's firstborn right, because the right of the firstborn is a double portion, and he gets tricked into giving it to Jacob for a bowl of stew. Esau, because of this, he plans to kill Jacob, and so Jacob runs south to his uncle Laban. And then Jacob later is tricked by Laban, and then he leaves on bad terms with his two sister wives, kind of weird, kind of sus. Jacob, two sister wives, as well as their handmaidens. So they have handmaidens serving them and their needs. And later he ends up sleeping with the handmaidens for some other reasons, because the ladies go through seasons of barrenness. They can't have children, and so they give them their handmaidens to have more children. Kind of weird, kind of sus. And so Jacob ends up having 12 sons with 4 different women. Kind of weird, kind of sus. And then his daughter, Dinah, is, for lack of better terms in this audience, she is violated by a local prince of Shechem. And Jacob and his sons are rightfully angry at this. And so what they do is they make a peace treaty with them, and they basically have them snip some sensitive areas of skin. And while they are bedridden and sleeping off to recover, 2 of the brothers, Simeon and Levi, come in while they're recovering and sleeping in bed and kill all of them to avenge their sister Dinah for the wrong that was done to her. And the father was mad about this because now they are a stench in the land. Everyone's upset with them. Reuben, the oldest, ends up sleeping with his father's concubine, Bilhah, one of the servant girls of Leah. And that caused an awkward rift between his father and him for the duration of his life. And later his father gets back to that in his blessings because he doesn't bless him. He looks back on this event and says, nope, you're cursed because of this. When Joseph is finally born, the firstborn of Rachel, he becomes his father's favorite child because Rachel's his favorite wife. Favorite child. She struggled to give birth for a while and finally gave birth to him, and then he was the favored one. And then he ends up making him a coat. You guys know the Prince of Egypt story, the coat of many colors. And this kind of elevates him as a status above his brothers. And they hate him for this. And later they sell him into slavery to, guess who? Ishmaelites. Remember that guy Ishmael, the brother of Isaac, who made fun of Isaac and was sent away with his mom into the desert and they almost died? That Ishmael, his descendants come back around and take Joseph, a descendant of Isaac, the firstborn son Isaac, into slavery. So, anyway, all that to say, dysfunctional family, a lot of chaos going on. Yes?
It's not the Prince of Egypt story.
What?
It's Moses.
Oh, Moses, the Prince of Egypt. Yeah, what do they call Joseph? King of Dreams?
Joseph.
Is that the Disney version? Joseph, King of Dreams. All right, so all of that summarizes hopefully where we pick off today. What am I doing? Stop. Okay, Genesis 30. If you guys have your Bibles, you can look up Genesis 30. Starting in verse 14, I will get 3 readers to read through this quickly. And actually, if we have any of our new people today that want to read, this would be a great moment to step up and read some scriptures.
I'm new.
Okay, we will start with Hannah. And then, what's your name? Justice. Anyone else? And then we'll pass it back up to Zane. Okay, go ahead and start reading verses 14 and 15. And then, Justice, you have 16 through 17. And then Zane will pick up 22 through 24.
One day during the wheat harvest, Reuben had found some mandrakes growing in a field and brought them to his mother Leah. Rachel begged Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But Leah angrily replied, "It wasn't enough that you stole my husband. Now you wanted to steal my son's mandrakes too?" Rachel answered, "I will let Jacob sleep with you tonight if you give me some of the mandrakes."
Sister wives, they've got some drama. Okay, let's get it to Justice. And Justice, you have 16:17.
When Jacob came from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he lay with her that night, and God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son.
Cool. Let's pass it up to Zane. So bought for some mandrakes for a night with Jacob. She got a son, and then Rachel is upset. And then here's what happens next.
Then God remembered Rachel's plight and answered her prayers by enabling her to have children. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. "God has removed my disgrace," she said, and named the son Joseph. For she said, "May the Lord add yet another son to my family."
Cool. And the reason she says another son is not because she had a son prior, but because her servant girl, who is theoretically part of her lineage, she gets that right to call her those sons. But this is her natural born, firstborn son, Joseph. So, kind of weird, right? We have some weird details in this story. And this is, we had apologetics events on Sunday. This can be an apologetic to the Bible's authenticity, is because the Bible, one of the reasons you trust it, is if you make up a book about something and you want it to kind of elevate you to a higher status. People say that they wrote the Bible so priests could get power. You wouldn't really have all these really weird details that throw you under the bus, like sister wives fighting over him and then lying to his brother to get an inheritance, and then Abraham casting Isaac's brother out and later coming to sell Joseph into slavery. All these details don't really fit the narrative of people writing a story to give themselves power. You wouldn't write these details in. These are like the naughty bits of things that you want to leave out of your story if you're writing one. But the Bible includes it as an apologetic because we can trust it. The Bible writes about these things not because they're good, but because it's recording accurate history, because this was what actually happened. All right, Genesis 37:2. I'm going to read this very quickly. This is the account of Jacob and his family when Joseph was 17 years old. Is anyone in here 17 or older? 17. He tended to his father's flocks. He worked for his half-brothers, the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah, the servant girls. But Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things his brothers were doing. So, in other words, Joseph was a snitch. And we all know that snitches get stitches, which is what happens in just a little bit. You guys know that expression, right? Snitches get stitches. Okay. Yep. All right. Good. All right. So, couple verses, or the next verse, verses 3 and 4. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him of his old age through his favorite wife Rachel, her firstborn son. And he gave him a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their fathers loved him more than the rest of them. Would this cause you some rift in your family? Do you guys have a brother that your parents give more attention than you? Are you annoyed by that? Are you like, I want to strangle them, I want to kill them, I want to sell them to slavery and throw them down a pit? Probably not that far. Don't actually do that. Probably not that far, but this kind of favoritism can cause a rift in the family, and this is what happens. So, I'm going to get two readers. You can read off the screen if you so want. Genesis 37, 6 through 8, and then I'm going to have a second reader read verses 9 through 10. Okay, Daniel-san, 37, 6 through 8. It'll be on the screen as well. And then Cody, you can read 9 and 10.
Listen to this dream, he said. We were out in the field tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine. His brothers responded, So you think you will be our king, do you? Do you actually think you will reign over us? And they hated him all the more because of the dream and the way he talked about them.
Right. Wouldn't you guys be upset with this dream? Your brother is telling you that you're going to bow down to him eventually. That's what the dream's telling you. You'd be rightfully angry. And the second dream.
Soon Joseph had another dream, and again he told his brothers about it. Listen, I had another dream. he said, "The sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed low before me." This time he told the dream to his father as well as to his brothers, but his father scolded him. "What kind of dream is that?" he asked. "Will your mother and I and your brother actually come and bow to the ground before you?"
Cool. So two dreams essentially saying his brothers, his mother and his father are going to eventually bow down to him. Like, this is kind of making him some kind of prince, some kind of king, right? That's weird. He's like almost the youngest son. He is the firstborn of his mom, Rachel, but he's like 11th in line, right? That doesn't really grant you the rights of superiority, of the hierarchy structure of a family unit, right? But he's telling his brothers they're going to bow down to him. And so they're mad about him because he's the favorite child. They're mad about him because he has a special cloak that none of the other brothers got. They're mad about him because he has these dreams basically saying his brothers are going to bow down to him. And so what do? Like any rational human being would, they throw him in a pit, sell him into slavery. So I'm just going to briefly summarize the rest of the chapter. So the brothers were at Shechem. Why is Shechem important? What happened at Shechem? I said it a minute ago. Dinah. What happened to Dinah? Something terrible happened to Dinah. And then they did something to the town. What was that town called? Shechem. Okay. Yeah, you guys are catching on. All right, so the brothers were at Shechem, the same town that they slaughtered all the men who had violated their sister Dinah. So maybe there might have been some people still alive in that region that might have had some beef with them. Who knows? But they're in this spot, which is kind of ironic because they went and killed them before. And so Jacob sends Joseph to this town of Shechem because they know that they're there to basically spy on them and report back to him what he finds. So Jacob gets there, and his brothers see this as a perfect opportunity. He's alone in this field. There's no one to guard him. And they grab him and they throw him into a cistern, which is basically a well. It's a hole in the ground meant to hold water. They throw him in here. And then this trading caravan comes by. Who were the trading caravan? What were they? What nationality are they? Ishmaelites. And why is that important? They're descended from Ishmael, the brother of Isaac. Yes, someone else. Give me answers. All right. Make sure you guys are paying attention. So, yeah, they sell them into slavery to Ishmaelites, the descendants of Ishmael, because they're relatives of Ishmael and Isaac. They're brothers. And they sell them for 20 pieces of silver. Sometimes the math doesn't work out when we translate to dollars, whether you want to go with like actual inflation value of what they had back then or what you could purchase with the same money today. I know there's two different methods. But anyways, there's a figure people throw out there as $200. They sold them into slavery for the equivalent, depending on how you do it, $200 US. So if you sell your brother or sister into slavery, I don't know, maybe try to get a better deal. Maybe more than 200. Like I would give mine for like maybe 1,000. I don't know. We'll see. I'm kidding. So he is eventually bought when he's transferred to Egypt by Potiphar. Potiphar is Pharaoh's captain of the guard. So pretty prominent guy. And then really quickly, it transfers from Joseph's story in verse 38 to someone else. And this guy is called Judah. And he has 3 sons. And he gives the firstborn son, or I don't know how you pronounce that, to Tamar, this lady called Tamar. And what happens is he errs, his name is Er, he errs and does wickedness, and God basically kills him because he's wicked. And then, as per the custom, as per the law, he gives his second son, Onan, to Tamar as a husband because she did not have children yet. And Onan does something as wicked as his brother, and God kills him off. And then he has a third son, Shelah, I don't know how you pronounce that. And he's young, so he's not ready for marriage yet. And so basically, she waits for the time for him to be old enough to marry. And he eventually does get older, and it's the appropriate age to marry. And the father does not do anything. She waits and waits and waits, and the father never gives his third son to her, which is lawfully what he should do. And so she does something weird. She hatches a plan, and eventually her and her father-in-law sleep together, and they have twins. And one of those twins would eventually be the ancestor of Jesus. Jesus comes in the lineage of Perez, the twin son of Tamar and Judah. And as you guys know, the scriptures say the scepter would never depart from the line of Judah. So Judah, descendant of Jacob, Isaac, Abraham. This is the lineage that gets passed down to us. So again, an apologetic that the Bible is true. Why would the Messiah figure, the king of the universe, pick a terrible, terrible story of this? That a woman is widowed twice to then sleep with her father-in-law to then bear the child that will eventually be the Messiah. Why would he pick that story? Because it's true. The Bible does not hide historical fact, even if it doesn't work out in our favor. So that's a good apologetic for you. All right, Genesis 37:2. This phrase appears throughout Joseph's story. There was one earlier in when he was with his father, but we skipped that one. The Lord is with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did and served in the home of his Egyptian master. So God is with Joseph continually. He's with him at his father's house, and then he gets sold into slavery and bought up by Potiphar. And it says that the Lord is still with him, and he blesses him. He succeeds in everything he does. So even when he's ostracized by his family, kicked out, sold into slavery, God is still right there by his side. Long story short, he's prospering. Joseph is an attractive young dude, and he catches the attention of Potiphar's wife, and she's like, he's looking fine. She goes after him. He doesn't like it. He refuses. He runs away. She rips out a part of his cloak, and then she gives that cloak and starts crying to her husband, saying that he tried to violate her, and then her husband throws him in prison. He's wrongfully accused, throws him in prison, and then in prison we get to Genesis 39:23. The warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. We get this phrase again. So God blesses him with his father's house. He gets sold into slavery, brought into Potiphar, the captain of the guard's house. The Lord is still with him. He gets framed for something he didn't do, gets thrown in prison, and the Lord is still with him. Long story short, he prospers in prison. He's made manager over them. He sees two men who look kind of sad, so he asks them if he can help, and they tell him two dreams. The cupbearer shares his dream, and Joseph tells him that in a couple days he's going to get his job back, but the chief baker, sorry, buddy, you're going to get killed. I can't help you. That's just the interpretation of the dream. And these things that he prophesies come to pass, and they happen. And he tells the cupbearer he's going to have his job back in a couple days as the chief cupbearer to Pharaoh, and so please don't forget about me in prison. Tell the Pharaoh about me. Tell him about my plight, about my wrongful accusation. Bring me out of this place. And the cupbearer forgets about him. And a long time passes, and then Pharaoh has a dream. Pharaoh dreams that there will be seven stalks of wheat, and then seven really wrinkly stalks of wheat. They all die and wrinkly and whatever. And then he dreams of 7 ripe, good cows, and then 7 scrawny cows that look like they're on death's row. There might be pictures of those on the next slide there. So these are the dreams that he has, and it's kind of weird. Pharaoh doesn't know what to do with it. And the cupbearer remembers. He's like, oh, I had a dream once. I had a dream. And he remembers there was a man in prison, wrongfully accused, that interpreted his dream and the chief baker's dream, and he was right. And he tells Pharaoh about this, and Pharaoh calls him up, and Joseph gives him the interpretation of the dream. Basically saying that there's going to be 7 years of good luck and good agriculture. They're going to have plenty of crops. And then 7 years of bad luck. There's going to be a major drought, and it's going to be so bad that they're going to forget about the 7 good years. And Pharaoh is like, what do we do? I have no idea how to do this. And Joseph says, pick someone wise to manage all of the agriculture for 7 years. Store it up. And then in the 7 bad years, you can dish it out to people so that you can survive this terrible, terrible drought and famine. And Pharaoh's basically like, I wonder who better to do this than Joseph, who was a great manager of the prison that he was at, even though he was wrongfully accused. And he was a great manager of Potiphar, the captain of the guard's house, even though he was sold into slavery by his brothers. Who better to do it than him? Long story short, he does this. He becomes basically second in command, vice-regent of all of Egypt. There is no one more important than him in Egypt except for Pharaoh himself. There is nothing, no power that Joseph can't do, except anything that Pharaoh says he can't do. He gives Joseph all of his power. And Eventually, his brothers come back because the drought is so far that it reaches them in Lebanon. And they come up to Egypt, and they're like, we need food, buddy. And they don't recognize their brother because he looks really different. He's in Egyptian clothes. He looks kind of like royalty, like a king, a prince, vice regents. And what do they do when they get there? Who can guess? They bow down to him, exactly like his dream said, right? He prophesied about that how many years before? Not 6, 7. 23. He prophesied about that 23 years prior. And then he finally gets the fulfillment of his prophecy, his dream, here when his brothers bow down to him asking for food. And then his brothers eventually come up with their father into Egypt, and his father also bows down to him. So it's a fulfillment of this dream. And then later on, when they're all well and fed and the drought's over and done with, they get this beautiful land of Goshen, which is the most fertile land in all of the region. And his brothers are still kind of worried that Joseph's going to get revenge on them. And in Genesis 50, 17 through 20, they're basically like, Joseph, we're your slaves. Please don't punish us. This was our father's last command before he died, is to not punish us. And then Joseph said, don't be afraid of me, and am I God that I can punish you? What you intended to harm me, but God intended all of that for good. He brought me to this position as a vice regent of Egypt, as a slave, as a wrongfully accused man to be thrown in prison, so I could save the lives of many people. So instead of Joseph responding in hate and in vengeance and anger, he forgives his brothers and realizes that God had a plan the entire time. God was with him the entire time. And then we get to Genesis 50. I'm just going to read one verse really quickly. 50:25. Joseph made the sons of Israel swear an oath, and he said, when God comes to help you and lead you back, you must take my bones with you back to the land that God promised Abraham. And in Hebrews 11:21 through 22, it says, it was by faith that Jacob, when he was old and dying, blessed his sons, blessed each of Joseph's sons, and bowed in worship as he leaned on his staff. It was by faith that Joseph, when he was about to die, said confidently that the people of Israel would leave Egypt. He even commanded them to take his bones with them when they left. This is a prophecy Joseph made. And earlier in Hebrews 11, it says, faith is the confidence of things we hope for that will actually happen. It gives us assurance about things we can't see. And through their faith, the people in the days of old, all the patriarchs learned about last week through Joe's message, through Joseph, all these people of old earned a good reputation by their faith. By faith, it's how we understand that the entire universe was formed at God's command, that what we see now did not come from anything that can't be seen, or anything that can be seen. So nothing in this earth came from something that is physical, like a golden calf that they worshipped back then. It all came from God, who's above all things, and Jesus, who's in all things, and he makes all things for himself. So Joseph exemplified faith in God throughout all of his struggles, being sold into slavery, hated by his brothers, being put in Potiphar's house, falsely accused, thrown in prison, and then eventually God did this so he can save the lives of many people, including his family that ostracized him and hated him. So that, my dear friends, is the story of Joseph. Huzzah. All right, let's pray. Dear God, thank you for this day, and thank you for Joseph, Lord. Thank you for stories in the Bible that we don't like reading because they're kind of weird, they're kind of sus, but we know that you put it in there because you are recording history accurately for us so that we can see the entire story, the good and the bad, and see how you have used the bad for good. Just as Joseph's story, he says, what they intended for harm, for evil, God had planned it all for good, to save the lives of many people, Lord. You've done that through your son, Jesus, as well. He died on the cross, a terrible, terrible death. But God, you used that for good, so that we could all be saved and be brought into heaven with you one day. And it's in the mighty name of Jesus that we pray. Amen.